Welcome. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here. Today's video is about whether or not debt and wealth can coexist. I want to explore the question of whether or not debt is incompatible with wealth building. In today's video, I'm going to discuss whether debt is good or bad, whether you should avoid debt at any cost. I'm going to share my own debt story, and then I'm going to give two scenarios. In both of them, my aim is going to be to compare the outcome of saving to invest and taking your extra money to pay that. And then I'm going to give you my conclusions, and then at the end, of course, I always include some references. But first, here's a little bit about me. Hi, welcome to my channel. Thank you for watching. Here's a little bit about me. My household consists of myself, my husband, and my toddler. My mom also lives with us, but she's not included in our finances. We live in a high cost of living city in the Northeast. My husband and I both went to graduate school, but fortunately, we no longer have student loan debt. I work in banking and he works in aviation. I take care of the family's finances, and I love my role as the self-appointed CFO. I love to talk about all things money, whether it's investing, saving, or making money. I look forward to sharing a wealth building journey with you. I look forward to getting to know you, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, let's get started. Before we get into whether or not we should avoid debt, we should determine what debt is and what different kinds of debts there are. Debt is something that is owed. It's an obligation, something that you have to pay back. There are different kinds of debt. There's secured debt, like if you have a house that you pay for the mortgage every month, that debt is secured by the house. If you have a car that you have a car note on, that debt is secured by the vehicle. There's unsecured debt, like your student loans or your credit card bill. If you go to the grocery store and you buy food with your credit card, or if you go to Home Depot and buy some home improvement supplies, if you don't pay it back, there is nothing that they can take specifically in exchange for that debt. It doesn't mean they can't take you to court, but it does mean that they're not going to go into your house and rip out your drywall, rip out your toilet because you use a credit card to buy a toilet. So that debt in that sense is not secured. Same thing with student loans. Your diploma is yours. Of course, somebody can always sue you and take you to court, but they can't take your degree. Student loan debt is unsecured debt. There's also high interest debt, and there is low to no interest debt. I've actually had a 0% interest debt before. It was a subsidized debt based on a clean energy program that my state was doing. I was able to use 0% debt to redo the central air conditioning in my house. I'm sure the bank made some money, but it wasn't from me. It was probably from the state, which subsidized the loan. There's debt that is fixed, and there's debt that it has variable interest rate. Most likely a car note is going to be something that is fixed for the life of the loan, whereas an adjustable rate mortgage or a credit card debt is a debt that is going to change based on whatever the market is doing with interest rates. It could be that the rate changes every month. It could be that the rate changes whenever the lender feels like the rate should change. Or in the case of an adjustable rate mortgage, you might have specific notice of when a debt is going to change. You might have a debt that is fixed for 7 years and then it adjusts every year after that, or whatever the case might be. I cited some examples of debt here already, which is your house, your car, your credit card, student loan. Now, knowing what we know about debt, what we just discussed, the next question I have is, should we avoid debt at all costs? If you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit the like button so the algorithm knows that it's good, and of course, subscribe for more content. If you think any of the information that I provide here might be helpful to somebody else, be sure to share it with them. And I'm not really quick to say no. I'm more inclined to say it depends. It depends on the purpose of the debt. Is it for consumption or is it for improvement? And when I say improvement, I don't mean home improvement, I mean self-improvement. I would categorize shopping for clothing, shopping for cars as consumption, investing, real estate investing, for example. Or did you use the debt for school? I know student loan debt is very controversial these days. There's lots of talk about whether or not it should be canceled. We're fully aware that there is some predatory lending going on. There are some for-profit schools that give useless degrees and charge people for them. And there are some people who went to really expensive schools because they fell in love with the idea of a school. Maybe they like the mascot. Maybe they were a legacy. Whatever the case might be, you have 17 and 18-year-olds making decisions about taking on six-figure debt to attend schools, and sometimes they have degrees that don't give them a lot of return on investment because they might have taken out $120,000 loan to study a degree that debt is in a field that doesn't pay them very well. We hear about these examples all the time, but that is not the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people who go to school do not have more in debt than they can earn in a lifetime. It doesn't mean that the bad examples do not exist. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of bad examples, but these examples are not necessarily representative of everybody who goes to school or even the average person who goes to school. Yes, you'll hear that the average lawyer graduates with $150,000 in debt. Somebody will leave medical school with $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 even, maybe even $500,000 in debt. But how much does a surgeon make? How much does a dentist make? How much do top paid lawyers make? It doesn't mean that the debt isn't high, but we can't forget that their earning potential far exceeds whatever debt that they have taken on. Most people will be in a position to fully pay off their debt and live well. Because of that, I am still going to categorize student loans as the kind of debt you take on for self-improvement. The next question that you have to consider is, what is the cost of the debt? Is it high interest debt or is it low interest debt? Is the debt in the 2 to 3% range? Or is it like a credit card where it's a minimum of 12% and it only goes up from there? You got to ask yourself, how predictable is the debt? Is it fixed or is it variable? A debt that changes every month or even a debt that changes every couple of years is a lot harder to plan for than a debt that is fixed for the life of the loan. Number 4, what other alternatives do you have? Is there a better use of your available cash? You may have cash, but you may not want to spend the cash depending on what else you can do with it. Say, for example, you have a low or no risk investment that gives you a return that is far above the interest rate of the debt. And on top of that, the interest rate of the debt is below the inflation rate. Maybe you decide that your money is better used that way. Number 5, are you using the debt in moderation? Too much of anything is bad. Are you just taking up what you need to achieve your goals? Or are you taking on more than you need because you are indulging? I'll give you an example. When I was an undergrad, I did have undergraduate loans. My loans covered my tuition, my room and board. I also had 2 jobs. I had a job on campus and I had a job off campus. The money that I made from that job, I used it to pay my day-to-day bills, to meet my personal needs. I also paid my cell phone bill and my insurance bill. But I was a student making minimum wage. Even with 2 jobs, I didn't have a lot of money. There were things that I didn't do. For example, in the 4 years that I was in school, not once did I go on spring break. I simply couldn't afford it and my parents couldn't pay for it. When I graduated college, the only debt that I have was my student loan. I had no credit card debt. There were some people that I graduated with that had both student loans and credit card debt. Some of them were people who did go on spring break. Now, I'm not saying that spring break was the only reason they had credit card debt. Let's not forget, textbooks are expensive as well. If you put a textbook on a credit card, it does add up pretty quickly. Every semester, you're spending thousands on textbooks. But my whole point in making this statement is that I made sure to only borrow what I absolutely needed. And this is where you strike the balance, moderation, what you need versus what you want. And finally, the next question that I would ask is it a necessity? For example, you need a place to live. Everybody does. Sure, you can rent. If your option for a place to live is to buy a house, you can use a mortgage to buy that house. That is very different from doing a cash out refinance to renovate your house. A roof over your head is a necessity. Nicer fixtures are more of a luxury. I've done a lot of work to my house over the last couple of years, but mostly what I've done has been to save for months or even up to a year, and when I have enough, I start the work. Now, I wouldn't do that if my heat broke or if I needed to replace my roof, because these are necessities. But when I wanted to redo a bathroom, when I wanted to redo a kitchen, I put money away for a year until I had enough to do the renovations, even though they were ugly, but they were wants and not necessities. With that said, I'm gonna give you my own debt story. I'm going to talk about the debts that I have taken on that have changed my life for the better. This is why my answer to whether or not you should have debt isn't no, it depends. Because in my case, I have had some experiences with debt that have done nothing but make my life better. And we're gonna go through a couple of examples. Let's start with my teen years, in my early 20s. I wanted to go to college and I needed to go to college, but my family couldn't afford it. There was no amount of saving that would have allowed my family to pay for college for me. That was simply not our economic status. I did make some choices, like choosing a cheaper school over a more expensive one, but at the end of the day, I needed student loan debt in order to attend. How has college changed my life? This isn't simply an anecdote. These are studies. The results are decisive. Higher education leads to much better financial outcomes. People who go to college have lower unemployment, they have higher earnings, and they have higher wealth. I found an additional study that states that people who go to college tend to have higher financial market participation, meaning that people who go to college are more likely to not just save their money, but also invest it in the stock market. And we know the stock market is a huge wealth builder. I graduated college. I started making very good money compared to where I was before. Thanks to higher education, when I was in my early 20s, I was making more money than people in my family who were in their 50s. As a result, I ended up paying for my student loans in 2 years. Of course, college is not the only reason why I was able to achieve that. I have explained in the past that I was able to continue living at home for pretty cheap, but no amount of living at home for free or cheap is going to allow you to save the money that I saved. Not if you're making minimum wage, not if you're making $10 an hour. Certainly living at home played a huge role, but also having higher earning potential was a fantastic boost. That's one example. Example number 2, homeownership. I bought my first home in my 20s and I did it with a 20% down payment, but I couldn't afford the full amount in cash. I had no choice but to get a mortgage. If you're watching this video, I imagine you're very interested in personal finances. And if you are interested in personal finance, I imagine that you know that real estate is a huge wealth builder. You're not at the mercy of a landlord who's going to raise your rent, but you're also able to use leverage to own an appreciating asset, and you can build generational wealth by having a legacy that you can leave your kids. We don't live in that house anymore, but I still own it. You might be wondering, or maybe you're not, but I need to talk about this scenario anyway, so I'm going to say that you're wondering. Suppose you're wondering why I didn't just buy outright. If I save 20%, then I can save 60%, then I can save 100%, right? Because with 20%, I'm what, a fifth of the way there? Let's talk about that. It took me 6 years to save that 20%. And that was with low housing prices after the great financial crash of 2008. If I had been waiting to buy in cash, I would have been locked out by now. If you don't believe me, just look at what housing prices have done in the last couple of years. In fact, one of the things that prompted this video was in part this post that I found on Reddit. Here's what it says. In the last 2 years, I started looking at buying a home, but it has been very hard and prices only keep going up. I can barely afford anything in my area and I make almost $200,000 a year. Houses listed get multiple offers within 24 hours of posting in the MLS, and buyers are signing away inspections and appraisals with wild abandon. This has been going on for 2 years. So not only are prices higher, but the buying process is more expensive and entails high risks. For example, a low appraisal could mean that you owe $100,000 on top of the sale price. Rising interest rates don't seem to be calming the market at all, but are increasing borrowing costs. Is there anything wrong with just saying, screw it? My rent will keep going up, perhaps $200 to $300 a month per year. My income has increased, but it doesn't seem to matter in the housing market when there's so much demand and so little supply. I feel like a fool even trying to buy something in this market. Could I just decide not to buy anything and instead take it easy for a few years before relocating somewhere that I might be better able to afford? What are the pros and cons from a financial standpoint? This post really put it in perspective for me. The people who are waiting either to have enough cash to buy, or they are waiting to have 20% down so they can completely avoid PMI, or they're even waiting for 25% down. This is the risk that you face, being completely locked out of the market. Don't forget what this person says. I can barely afford anything in my area and I make almost $200,000 a year. When I bought my house, I was not making $200,000 a year. I wasn't even making half of that. If my plan was to wait until I could buy in cash, I would have simply never bought, because it is very possible for the market to get away from you. So yes, taking on a mortgage is something that changed my life for the better. Number 3, a graduate degree. When I started my graduate program, my employer was paying a certain amount. It was covering not all of it, but a lot of it. I decided to switch jobs. The new employer was paying much less. I ended up with student loans again. I had paid my undergrad loans only to turn around and found myself shackled with graduate student loan debt. And I can tell you that those are much less favorable than undergrad loans. They're not subsidized, the interest rates are higher. When I was choosing a school, my employer was paying a substantial amount towards my student loan. Cost wasn't really a factor. I went to a pretty expensive school for graduate school. Now here I am at a new employer that's paying less. What do? I continued with my degree. It wasn't pleasant to see my loan balance go up after I had worked so hard to get rid of my undergrad loans. I kind of felt like I was back at square one. Not only did I get loans again, I got more loans the second time around because that other school was more expensive. But in the end, I ended up getting promoted faster. I used those raises to accelerate my repayment plan. Even though I was on a 10-year repayment plan, I paid off my graduate student loans in 4 years. Right now, I have no further interest in leaving my employer because I do have a toddler and I have to prioritize my work-life balance. I want to be around for my family. It matters to me that I work fewer hours. But when my son gets older and he doesn't need me as much, or if something happens that makes me unhappy where I am, certainly a graduate degree isn't a guarantee of anything. It is very unlikely that somebody with my experience level combined with a graduate degree is simply going to be overlooked for jobs. And the fourth and final example that I want to give is going to take us back to real estate. Slightly different example. This time we're not talking about the necessity of having a roof over your head, but more like investing. I have 3 rental properties. We've already talked about real estate being a significant wealth builder, using leverage to be able to own an appreciating asset. Just like the house that you live in, it's a legacy for your kids. It also gives you cash flow. I posted a video a couple of days ago about my zero-based budget, where I talk about the money that comes in and all the money that flows out and how we allocate those funds to pay bills, to save, to invest. You'll see that my incoming rent far exceed my outgoing expenses. I'm gonna keep doing those videos monthly, so make sure you check those out. That's additional cash flow. It's not as easy as holding an index fund. It has its own risks, but it's a different asset. It's my way of diversifying. And it also offers me an opportunity for tax deferral. You get a lot of these same benefits if you buy cash, but look at those prices. I would have been locked out of the market if I was waiting to have enough for cash. Instead, I took that cash and I split it up into 3 different down payments. Instead of concentrating my risk, I've diversified across properties. So that was another way that debt worked for me. All of those are things that have changed my life for the better. The next example that I'm gonna give isn't life-changing because I want to be clear that I'm not looking for excuses. That's not the point of this video and that's not the point of this channel. We don't make excuses. We give explanations, but we don't make excuses. My goal is for my explanations to be rooted in fact and numbers. With that said, that was my disclaimer for the final category that I'm going to discuss here. The next one is the car. We have a car note. That's not something that is life-changing, but in this particular situation, it was about finding an alternative use for my money. It was more about optimizing my cash and optimizing my finances rather than changing my life. We bought a car in December. You might have forgotten what rates were like last year. Man, we were getting bargains and didn't even know it. When we bought the car, we financed it at 1.9%. If you're curious about what the process was like for us, I do have a separate video for that. I will link it in the description box below. Make sure you check it out. In October of 2021, there was an announcement that the November rate for I-bonds was going to go to 7.12%. I had enough cash to either pay off the car or to put money in I-bonds, not both. Now you stop and you think about that for a minute. You have an opportunity to invest in a risk-free asset that is backed by the full faith of the US government for a rate of return that is over 7%. That is one option. And the second option that you have for your money is to pay a loan that has an APR of 1.9%. Which one would you do? In this case, by investing in I-bonds rather than paying cash for the car, I am actually making 5% on my money. I would be not just crazy, but literally stupid to do anything else with that. And yesterday, I made another video that talked about the inflation rate as of March of 2022 based on the latest CPI data, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting that inflation is now over 8%. When the new rates are announced for I-bonds in April of 2022, effective in May of 2022, we are very likely looking at I-bonds in the range of 8 to 9%. So by opting to lock up my money in I-bonds, I have put myself in a position to earn relatively astronomical rates of return compared to a high yield savings account and compared to any cost of borrowing for at least 18 months. Now, none of this involves guessing. The car was purchased in December and the interest rates for I-bonds were announced in October. I made the decision to lock up the money knowing full well that I would have to take a loan. But I was also watching the loan rates and they were all at 3% or below. It simply did not make any sense for me to go out and use that money to buy a car in cash and miss out on the opportunity to get those historic rates. I can get those rates in the stock market, but the stock market has a lot of volatility in the short term. This is guaranteed money. I have 2 videos on I-bonds. I will link both of them in the description box below as well if you want to check them out. This isn't an example of a life-changing decision, but it is certainly an example of the optimal use of money, and I have no regrets. Here are some scenarios that I think might be helpful because they will show you some of the math that might go into that decision making. We can't deny that a little bit of personal finance is mental and behavioral because your peace of mind is important. You should be able to sleep at night, and your behavior does affect the outcome of your personal finances. Those elements are certainly relevant, but the biggest driver should always be math. Let's look at those scenarios. The first scenario is whether or not we should save or invest. Those numbers that I selected are not random. I selected them because they do apply to my life. I did have to make some adjustments. I will tell you exactly what those adjustments are, but I had to make them so I can make everything equal. The first scenario is to decide whether or not you should invest or pay your debt. A situation where you have a mortgage and you have some extra money on the side that you could either invest or you can put additional payments towards your mortgage. In this scenario, the mortgage balance is $408,000. The reason why I'm using that amount is the amount that was refinanced when we refinanced our house. The adjustment that I made is that I'm not using the amount that is the current balance now because I wanted to start with everything being equal. I didn't think it would be fair for me to say, let me start with my current mortgage balance, which is lower, because at that point, then I would have had to start with my current investment balance. In order to make it all equal, I wanted to start with the original mortgage balance, which is $408,000. The other reason why I didn't want to start with the current balance is also because we have been paying on it. It made more sense to start at the refi balance because now I can do the full term of the loan. So we're talking a 30-year mortgage, $408,000 with the current rate that we have is 2.63%. And then we're going to say that we have an extra $2,000 a month. And that $2,000, it's the $1,500 that I have committed to putting into a brokerage account for the year 2022 and going forward. I don't know if we'll be able to keep up with it for the rest of our working lives, but that is my plan. We'll use that number for now because I have kept up with it so far this year. We'll see. And then the extra $500 is the money that I put in the 529 for my son. I'm keeping the $2,000 amount for the life of the mortgage because the way I see it is even if my son graduates college and I no longer contribute to his college fund, I'm just going to take that money and I'm going to keep contributing it to the brokerage. So either way, it's going to be $2,000. How it's split up is going to be irrelevant. We are going to estimate an average market return of 7%. These numbers that I'm giving you are not overly optimistic. If anything, they're conservative. Here's the result. If I make the minimum payment on the mortgage and I invest the $2,000 a month over the course of 30 years, I'm looking at an ending balance of $836,000 in my investments. On the other hand, if I don't put any of that money into investments and instead I decide to accelerate my mortgage payments, I'm going to be saving $489,000 on interest. When it's all said and done, investments are ahead by nearly $347,000. That's nothing to sneeze at. Let's look at a different scenario. For scenario 2, we're not going to make the investment horizon as long. A 30-year horizon where you're consistently saving or investing is nice, but that's not realistic. You should and can expect something to go wrong. So I'm going to throw a wrench in our plans. I am going to include a job loss at the 10-year mark. We're going to keep a lot of the same assumptions, but the only difference is that we're going to have a job loss after 10 years. Just like scenario 1, we're starting with a mortgage balance of $408,000. We're looking at 2.63%. But even though the loan is for 30 years, something bad happens at year 10. That's important because it changes our numbers a little bit. Say we have $2,000 a month extra over the course of those 10 years. Same situation, you're putting $2,000 a month away in the markets. We're still looking at an average market return of 7% over the course of that 10 years. And let's see what our results look like this time. If we decide to invest, we don't have as much put away because we haven't had 3 decades of compound returns. We've only had 10 years. We end up with an investment balance of $342,000. If we decide to pay our debt instead, we end up with an investment balance of $0 because we are paying debt down faster rather than investing our extra money. Here's what our loan balance looks like. If we decide to invest, we end up with a loan balance of $305,787,000. If we decide to pay down the debt, we end up with a loan balance of $31,608, almost 10 times the loan. But do you see the difference? If you invest, your loan balance is $306,000, but your investment balance is $342,000. If you pay your debt, you have $0 in investment, but you have a $32,000 loan. You owe them in both cases, but in one case, you have $0 in investments, and in the other case, you have more than $340,000 in investments. To summarize, you're either in a situation where you have 20 years remaining on a mortgage with $342,000, or you have 1 year and 1 month remaining on a mortgage with $0. I would rather have $342,000 than $0. Once you pay off that house, the only way you're ever going to get that money back is either to sell it or to refinance it. If you sell it, you still have to have a place to live. And if you refinance it, well, you can't because you're jobless. Liquidity is important. Real assets are important because you can sell them and they can appreciate. But liquidity is also important. If I lose my job, I would rather work something out with the bank than watch my family go hungry. Of course, there are a lot of things at play. I'm really simplifying the scenario here. There's unemployment insurance, there is severance pay, there's disability pay, and unless you're older, I really expect you to go out and hustle and get another job. I don't expect that you're going to be jobless for the rest of your life, but I'm willing to bet if 2 people end up unemployed, the one with $342,000 in investment is sleeping way better than the person with $0 in investments, no matter what their mortgage balance looks like. I still owe property taxes. I still got to pay the water bill, regardless of whether or not I have a mortgage. In my conclusion, debt was good for me. It can be good for others too. But I also have to acknowledge that debt is still harmful for people who have poor self-control, people who like to shop, people who don't budget, people who don't track their spending, and people who like to indulge. I also have to acknowledge that debt is bad for people who have low income and need expensive debt just to get by. There are people who are in debt not because they have poor self-control, but they have no choice but to put food on a credit card. But if you're putting food on a credit card, that's a very expensive way to pay for food. Or people who have limited opportunity to get better debt that is designed to facilitate self-improvement at favorable terms. Here's what I mean by that. If you can go out and get a payday loan at an interest rate that is the equivalent of highway robbery, that's not good debt. But if that same person who can get a payday loan can't even get a mortgage at 2 and 3%, that's not somebody who gets a lot of opportunity. Debt isn't good for this person. You'll notice that in the examples that I gave where debt was good for me, it was not only cheap debt, but it was also debt that gave me a leg up. Debt helped me move out of the lower working middle class. A payday loan, high interest credit cards, they're not going to do that for you. Now, that doesn't mean I like debt. It doesn't mean that I won't pay my debt. It doesn't mean that I'm looking for more debt. I still want to protect my credit. I still want to improve my cash flow, but I don't regret my debt as much as some of the other people who have had all of the downside of debt and none of its benefits. A lot of the debt that I mentioned was also early in my life. It was the times when I needed the debt to get something done, to get started. It was my launch pad, so to speak. But as I get older and I have been launched, I have alternative ways of doing things. So I'm not necessarily seeking out debt. I don't glorify it. But I think it's important for people to stop beating themselves up as long as they are making informed decisions and they have a plan for the future. As promised, here are some references which are sources and additional information. There's a Federal Reserve Bank paper on education, income, and wealth. And then I am also including the link for the Harvard Business School paper on education and financial market participation. If you have any questions about this video or my personal finances, feel free to leave me a note in the comment section below and I will be glad to answer them. But before you go, I always want to hear from you. Let me know what you think of this video, but also here are some questions for you. Are you afraid of debt? Have you had issues with debt? Comment below and let us know what your debt philosophy is. I look forward to hearing from you and I will see you in the next one. I would like to continue sharing my thoughts on all things money with you. So I would appreciate it if you could help out the channel by liking this video and sharing it with anyone you think might benefit from it. If you want to see more content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can know when new videos come out. I'll see you in the next one.